The night in Arcadia was so still that even the mountains seemed to sleep. Far above the forests and winding streams, the hidden cave of Maya glowed faintly from within, as if the stone itself sensed what was about to unfold. Maya had carried her child alone, deep in this cavern carved from limestone and shadow, an ancient place shielded from every wandering eye, especially the eyes of Hera, whose anger had a terrifying reach. The cave's chambers stretched far into the earth, lit only by the distant shimmer of underground streams and crystals embedded in the walls. Tonight, those crystals shivered with a gentle, golden breath of light. Maya knelt against the smooth rock floor, her hands pressed to the cool stone as the first wave of labor gripped her. There were no midwives, no sister nymphs, no comforting voices. She had chosen solitude, knowing that any witness to this birth would be a danger to both herself and the child. Hera was relentless. Even silence could be a shield. Her breaths came steady but soft, no cries, no fear. Maya knew the risks, but she also knew the nature of the life inside her. A child born of darkness, secrecy, and the thin edge between worlds. The cave responded to her labor. The deeper walls warmed and glowed like the embers of a torch, yet no flame existed. It was as if the stone itself recognized the arrival of something divine, something that did not belong solely to earth nor sky. This quiet glow wrapped around Maya like a living embrace, illuminating her with a soft radiance that held back the cold. Then, in a final exhale, the child slipped from her. Wrapped in the muted shimmer of dawn, a stillness settled. Maya lifted the infant carefully. She waited for the cry that usually marks a newborn's first breath, but no cry came. Instead, the child opened his eyes, deep, dark, impossibly aware eyes. He studied her, truly studied her, as though assessing the shape of her face, the lines of her exhaustion, the tremor in her hands. His gaze was not the blank wonder of an infant, but the sharp and quiet intelligence of someone who had already learned the world around him. Maya felt her breath catch. The child's tiny fingers opened and closed with surprising control. His little chest rose and fell with slow, thoughtful breaths as if he had been breathing since the beginning of time. This was no ordinary birth. This was the arrival of Hermes. He was silent, but not in fear. Silent in observation, silent because he chose to be. Maya wrapped him in soft lamb's wool, the fabric warm from her own body. She placed him gently into a winnowing basket lined with mountain herbs, their scent calming and sweet in the cool air. The infant settled immediately, eyes still wandering, exploring the flicker of crystal light, the shifting shadows, the quiet drip of water somewhere in the depths of the cave. His awareness unsettled her, not with fear but with awe. Maya, drained from the solitary struggle of childbirth, lay beside her son. Her eyes drifted shut, heavy with exhaustion. She believed he would remain in the basket until she awoke helpless, as any infant should be. But Hermes was not like other children. As soon as Maya's breathing softened into sleep, the infant stirred. He lifted his head first, studying her, as if deciding whether she needed him to remain still. He touched the wool blanket with careful precision, testing its texture between his fingers. Then, slowly, he pushed himself upright. The basket creaked beneath him, the woven reeds shifting under his weight, yet he made no sound. His movements were cautious, calculated, purposeful. He crawled over the edge of the basket, landing with surprising grace on the stone floor. The cave was cold, but he seemed unaffected. His bare feet touched the ground, and he stood wobbly, but determined. He took a single step, then another. He was less than an hour old, yet he walked with the steady curiosity of a child far beyond infancy. Hermes looked around him. He seemed to notice everything: the glow in the stone, the faint scent of herbs, the cave's subtle airflow that hinted at the outside world. His intelligence was not simply divine, it was instinctive, born from some ancient, hidden place. He took another step deeper into the cavern, where the air grew cooler. A sound echoed faintly, the low hum of the mountain's heart, the shifting of stone layers. Hermes tilted his head, listening intently, as though the mountain itself was speaking. But another sensation pulled him, an invitation, a whisper from the world beyond the cave. Hermes turned toward the entrance. A thin blade of early morning light cut through the vines that shielded the cave's mouth. The sun had not fully risen, but its first suggestion brushed against the stone, painting it in silver. Hermes stepped toward it. He moved with no hesitation, no fear of leaving the warmth of his mother. The world was calling him, not with sound, but with possibility. He reached the cave's threshold and paused. The cold mountain air brushed over him, but he seemed to relish it. Outside, the land stretched wild and untouched. Mist hung low over the slopes, pooling between boulders, drifting along the grass like wandering souls. The air was filled with the scent of pine and wet earth. Hermes took another step forward. His eyes scanned the landscape. He saw movement, a turtle resting on a flat rock near the cave, its shell catching the faint pre-dawn light. He blinked, intrigued, but something deeper stirred in him. Hunger not for food, but for exploration, for creation, for mischief. Hermes glanced back into the cave, toward his sleeping mother. For a moment, there was tenderness in his gaze, a soft warmth he had inherited from her solitude and gentleness. Then, with the certainty of a god who had already chosen his path, he stepped fully into the world. The morning belonged to him now. He was born from secrecy, but he would not remain hidden. He was born in shadow, but he would chase every edge of light. He was born silent, but he would reshape the world with words, music, and cunning. This was the beginning, the moment when the messenger of the gods first met the dawn. The moment when Hermes, newborn and yet ancient in spirit, took his first steps into myth. And the world, though still quiet, still veiled in mist, felt the presence of its new traveler. A traveler who would walk between realms, trick gods and men, invent wonders, steal what was guarded, guide souls through darkness, and bring messages across the boundaries of existence. But for now, he was simply a child taking his first steps out of a cave. A child with eyes that already held the shape of destiny. A child with feet ready to roam the worlds above and below. A child who would not stay still, could not stay still. Hermes, tiny, brilliant, restless, walked into the mist, the golden glow of the cave fading behind him. And Arcadia, in all its quiet beauty, welcomed him. The mist outside the cave drifted like pale smoke as the newborn Hermes stepped out into the waking world. His tiny feet touched the cool stone, and though the morning light was faint, it drew him forward as if calling his name. The air was crisp and scented with pine sap, mountain herbs, and the lingering sweetness of night. Hermes paused only for a moment, tasting the morning breeze as though learning a new language whispered by the earth itself. Ahead of him, a single patch of sunlight had managed to slip through the drifting fog and settle upon a flat stone. And there, basking lazily in the warmth, rested a tortoise, its domed shell glistening with dew as though lacquered by dawn. The creature did not flinch at Hermes' approach, for it sensed no threat, only curiosity. Hermes crouched beside it, head tilted, eyes wide with wonder, studying the curves and lines of the shell as if examining a puzzle the universe had left for him to solve. The tortoise blinked slowly, content, ancient, serene, unaware that destiny had wandered out of a cave and stopped at its side. Hermes placed a gentle hand upon the shell, feeling its smooth ridges, its cool weight, the echoes of the earth that had shaped it. In that moment, something stirred inside him, a vision, a spark, a creative impulse woven into his very nature. He saw the shell not only as a home but as a chamber of sound, as a cradle for music waiting to be awakened. The tortoise looked up into Hermes' eyes, and though the moment was silent, it was not without meaning. Hermes whispered something soft, a promise, a thank you, a blessing of transformation, words too ancient and gentle for any mortal ear to understand. Then, with delicate care, he lifted the tortoise and carried it back into the cave, where the golden crystals still glowed faintly along the walls. The creature remained calm, as if its spirit recognized the sacred purpose unfolding. Hermes set it upon a smooth stone surface and ran his small fingers along its shell, tapping it lightly. A hollow resonance answered, deep, pure, and filled with possibility. It was the sound of earth, of roots, of mountains breathing beneath the world. And Hermes smiled, because now he understood. He began to work, guided not by experience but by instinct older than the gods themselves. Tools materialized in his hands, summoned as naturally as breath, small blades of divine origin, shaped for precision and intention. He hummed a quiet tune as he worked, a melody without form yet woven with purpose. With reverence, he removed the tortoise from its shell, treating its remains with the solemn respect of a sacred offering. The shell, now empty, seemed to glow with an inner readiness, as though waiting to be reborn. Hermes cleaned the inner chamber, smoothing rough edges, carving gentle notches along the sides exactly as his intuition guided him. The shell's curved surface would serve as the resonating chamber, the heart of the instrument, where sound would swell and dance. Next, he ventured toward the cave's entrance, where patches of reeds grew near the trickling uplift of a mountain spring. Their stalks were tall, thin, flexible, perfect for shaping the frame of the instrument. Hermes gathered several reeds, cutting them with precision, selecting only those that matched the harmony forming in his mind. He laid them beside the shell and began to construct the frame, bending each reed carefully, binding them together with strips of mountain grass. Each connection clicked into place with a soft whisper, as though the reeds themselves approved of their new destiny. He attached them to the shell, forming a delicate bridge that arched elegantly across its surface. The harp-like structure now awaited only one thing: strings. Hermes paused, listening. In the distance, far beyond the cave's reach, he sensed the presence of a herd of Apollo's divine cattle grazing in a bright pasture. But even now, in his first morning of life, Hermes knew not to disturb them yet, for destiny was patient. Instead, he wandered to a small pasture where mortal cattle roamed under the watchful eyes of local herdsmen. There, he found what he needed: sinew from a bull that had recently died. Its spirit returned peacefully to the earth, leaving its body to the cycle of creation. Hermes approached reverently, understanding that life and death were intertwined, each playing its part in the music of existence. He collected strands of sinew and carried them back to the cave, humming the same quiet melody that had guided his hands since morning. Sitting beside the tortoise shell, he stretched the sinew strips, twisting and refining them into long, thin strings. 7 strings, one for each wandering star above, one for each rhythm of the heavens, one for every note that would shape mortal and divine hearts alike. He tightened each string across the reed frame, adjusting the tension, testing the pitch, listening for the exact resonance that aligned with the cosmic patterns embedded in his spirit. The first note he plucked hummed softly, trembling through the cave like a gentle ripple across still water. It was a beginning. He tuned the second string, then the third, letting each sound bloom fully before moving to the next. By the time he reached the 7th, the cave was filled with layers of delicate vibrations, shimmering like the golden light that clung to the stone. Hermes closed his eyes and touched all 7 strings at once. A chord rose up deep, warm, luminous, carrying the essence of earth, breath, and stars. The shell amplified the sound beautifully, its curved body catching the tones and sending them swirling through the cavern with soft echoes that lingered in the air. It felt like listening to the heartbeat of the world. Hermes smiled, and the cave seemed to brighten in return. He lifted the instrument, cradling it gently, admiring its elegant shape. The tortoise shell had become a vessel of harmony. The reeds had become pathways for sound to travel. The strings had become threads connecting sky to earth. This was the first lyre. Small, delicate, imperfect, only in the way all beginnings are imperfect, yet perfect in the way only divine creation can be. Hermes set it against his shoulder and plucked another slow, drifting melody. The notes glided through the cave, wrapping around the sleeping Maya, brushing against the hanging vines, vibrating softly through stone and shadow. The music was gentle but ancient, as though it remembered a time before gods, before night, before dawn itself. Hermes wandered deeper into the cave, playing as he walked, letting each tone illuminate some forgotten corner of the stone walls. The sound shimmered through the chambers, bouncing across the crystalline surfaces, filling the cavern with warmth. It was as though the mountain had become his audience. Even the underground streams seemed to hush as the lyre sang. Hermes played for a long time, discovering melodies that felt like they had always existed, waiting only for someone to give them shape. His fingers, small and delicate, danced across the strings with precision far beyond his newborn body. He played songs of curiosity, songs of dawn, songs of earth rising out of darkness. He played the birth of the morning and the shimmering breath of new possibilities. The cave's golden glow strengthened as though celebrating the music, reflecting soft light across the shell and reeds so they shimmered like moonlit water. Hermes knew that this instrument would not belong to him forever. He knew that its destiny lay in the hands of gods who understood music, prophecy, and harmony. But for now, it was his companion, his creation, his first gift to the world. He sat down on a smooth stone and played one last melody, a lullaby shaped by curiosity and divine instinct. The notes drifted out of the cave's entrance, sliding across the misty morning air, carried by the breeze into the mountains beyond. Birds paused, listening. The trees stood silently as if the melody wrapped around their trunks. Even the distant cattle seemed to raise their heads, sensing something new stirring in the world. Hermes lowered the lyre and gazed toward the light outside the cave. His journey had barely begun, yet he had already reshaped the morning with music. He had taken earth, breath, and celestial rhythm and woven them into harmony. He had created beauty out of silence, and the world would never be the same. For the gentle, wandering god of travelers, boundaries, and hidden paths had just crafted the first instrument of the gods, and the soft echo of that first song would linger through all ages, whispering its way across myth, across time, across every dawn that followed. The sun had just begun its slow ascent when Hermes stepped out of the cave again, his new lyre cradled under one arm like a quiet secret. Morning light spread across Arcadia in golden sheets, illuminating the slopes, the forests, and far beyond them, a distant meadow that shimmered as though touched directly by Apollo's own radiance. It was there, in that sun-kissed field, that Apollo's sacred cattle grazed an immaculate herd known for their flawless coats and divine luminescence. White as clouds and strong as temple pillars, these cattle were living symbols of order, perfection, and the sun god's gentle authority over harmony and pastoral beauty. Hermes saw them long before he reached them. The glimmering forms moved like softly glowing lanterns drifting across the horizon, each step deliberate, each breath a warm exhale into the crisp morning air. To anyone else, the sight would inspire reverence, perhaps even fear. To Hermes, however less than a day old, humming with curiosity, it sparked something else entirely. Possibility. Not mischief for mischief's sake, but the thrill of testing boundaries, of discovering what could be done with cunning and imagination rather than strength. He felt no malice, only an irresistible pull toward the unknown challenge. And so the infant god, still small enough for his steps to sound like raindrops on moss, wandered down the slope with deliberate calm. He approached the herd not as a thief, but as an artist approaching a blank canvas. Each cow lifted its head slightly as he neared, sensing his divinity but not his intent. They were tranquil creatures, accustomed to Apollo's warmth, unafraid of gentle company. Hermes placed a hand on the nearest animal's hide, feeling the warmth of sunlight still trapped within its coat. He whispered something to it, a quiet greeting, a promise of care, and the creature blinked at him with trusting, luminous eyes. Then Hermes began to think, not quickly, but deeply, as though every idea was a stone he picked up, examined, and set down in exactly the right place. If he were to take the cattle, he realized, he could not simply lead them away. Their hoofprints would betray the direction of travel. Any god, especially Apollo, would see the trail and follow it straight to him. So Hermes studied the ground with careful, deliberate attention. The earth was soft from night dew, ready to receive impressions. He knelt, running his fingers across the soil, and then, with the quiet certainty of inspiration, he designed his first plan. He would reverse the hoofprints. If the tracks appeared to go in the opposite direction, they would confuse even a god skilled in signs and omens. It was the kind of trick that required not speed, but meditation's slow, patient placement of each hoof, guiding each animal with gentle taps, turning chaos into pattern. Hermes began the work with remarkable serenity. He guided the cattle backward, easing them one step at a time, positioning their hooves so the prints pointed the wrong way. The animals, recognizing his calm authority, obeyed with surprising ease, moving as though performing a ritualized dance. Where a mortal thief would struggle with panic or haste, Hermes turned the act into a form of quiet artistry. The reversed tracks formed elegant lines in the soft earth, each print angled precisely, each misdirection deliberate and subtle. But the infant god was not finished. He looked at his own small, bare feet and realized he would leave tracks too tiny, unmistakably divine footprints that could reveal the truth. So he set about crafting his disguise. From bark and reeds, he fashioned crude but effective sandals, binding them to his feet with strips of grass. They were clumsy, oversized, and utterly unchildlike, exactly what he needed. When he walked, the footprints would resemble those of a full-grown man, confusing anyone who tried to follow him. The effect would be doubly misleading. Cattle whose tracks ran backward, and a mysterious adult who seemed to lead them. Satisfied, Hermes gathered the herd and began the journey. There was no haste, no frantic scrambling. He walked with the patient, measured stride of a monk leading a procession. The cattle followed him up winding slopes, through narrow paths lined with shrubs, and across shallow streams that sparkled like liquid silver. The morning deepened into warm light, painting the hills in soft gold. Hermes paused often, never out of exhaustion, but to observe. He would touch a leaf here, study a ripple in the water there, or pluck a string on his lyre in idle contemplation. The cattle waited for him, trusting him implicitly. What could have been chaos became a tranquil pilgrimage, a serene procession of divine animals through the Arcadian wilderness. Finally, after a long and thoughtful journey, Hermes reached a second cave system, a place separate from Maya's refuge, hidden between two slanted boulders and draped in ivy. This cave was deeper, darker, and unmarked by any divine presence, perfect for keeping secrets. Hermes guided the cattle into the cavern one by one, soothing them with soft gestures and murmured melodies. Inside, the air was cool and still, the kind of silence that absorbs even the faintest echo. Once the last of the 50 cattle crossed the threshold, Hermes moved a large stone to conceal the entrance, creating the illusion that the cave had always been empty and sealed. Not a sound escaped. Not a shadow gave them away. Hermes stepped back and examined his work with calm satisfaction. Every detail was in place. The reversed hoofprints, the misleading footprints of an adult man, the hidden cavern, the peaceful herd resting within. It was not a theft born of greed, it was a puzzle solved, a game played against the world's expectations. And now, the final step awaited. He needed to return before Maya awoke. Hermes retraced his path with slow, deliberate steps, ensuring he left no new signs behind. He paused again at the twisting stream, letting the cold water wash over his handmade sandals before removing them and tucking them away under a stone. The morning breeze brushed against his skin, but he welcomed it, carrying on its breath the scent of pine and the faint echo of his own earlier melody. As he neared the entrance to Maya's cave, the golden glow of the crystals returned to greet him. He walked inside quietly, his movements fluid and assured, as though nothing extraordinary had happened at all. Maya still slept, her breathing soft and deep, her face serene in the pale light. Hermes approached the basket where she had placed him just hours before. He stepped into it carefully, lowering himself onto the woolen lining. He pulled the fabric over himself, adjusted his posture to match exactly how she had left him, and let his eyes fall closed with remarkable theatrical precision. For a moment, he was still, then he breathed, slow and quiet, the perfect imitation of an infant who had never once left his bed. Outside, the world remained silent, unaware that a brand new god had already orchestrated one of the most audacious and strangely peaceful acts in divine history. The cattle rested safely in their hidden chamber. Apollo remained blissfully ignorant in his radiant meadow, and Hermes, less than a single day old, lay in his basket, feigning innocence with the serene confidence of someone who had mastered the art of cleverness before learning to crawl. He did not smile, not outwardly, but deep within, the spark of mischief glowed brighter than ever, ready for the next adventure, the next boundary to cross, the next story waiting to be written in the quiet spaces between dawn and dusk. For now, though, Hermes remained still, wrapped in lamb's wool, drifting peacefully in the golden half-light of the cave, an infant resting, a trickster dreaming, a god preparing for the sound of footsteps that would soon approach. The sun was high when Apollo approached his sacred meadow, his golden radiance spreading warmth across the land like a silent blessing. He had come, as he always did at this hour, to count his cattle, to admire their perfect forms, and to enjoy the peaceful beauty of his sunlit pasture. But today, something felt wrong. The air held a strange stillness, a pause in the usual rhythm of nature, as though the world itself was waiting for him to notice what had changed. Apollo stepped forward, his eyes scanning the grass, the shimmering light, the familiar shapes of divine creatures grazing under his watch. Then he froze. The number was wrong. His herd, so carefully tended, so deeply cherished, was smaller than it should have been. Cattle were missing, 50, to be exact. A slow, controlled breath escaped Apollo as he examined the ground. Hoofprints dotted the earth, but there was something odd about them. They pointed in the wrong direction, as if the animals had walked backward. Apollo narrowed his eyes. No mortal could achieve this level of deception. No creature would plan such a trick on its own. This was divine work, clever, mischievous, intentional. A god was involved. He crouched down, running his hand over the reversed hoofprint, and felt the faint echo of cunning woven into the soil. This was not chaos. It was design. Apollo rose, calm but cold, his golden aura intensifying as though the very light around him wished to assist. He followed the tracks, though he knew they were meant to mislead. Each print was placed with meticulous precision, guiding him along a path that felt both calculated and playfully taunting. Alongside the hoofprints, he detected another strange trail, the footprints of a grown man. Wide, clumsy, inconsistent, unnatural, yet the earth whispered truth to Apollo, and he sensed something impossible beneath the layers of deception. These were the tracks of someone small, a child, perhaps, No, an infant. But who could? Apollo's breath deepened. A newborn god. The realization fell over him like a shadow crossing the sun. And there was only one cave in Arcadia that held such secrets. The cave of Maia, the eldest Pleiad, the hidden lover of Zeus, and the mother of a child who had clearly awakened much earlier than expected. Apollo moved swiftly, the air shimmering around him as though pushing aside to make way for his radiant stride. The path twisted through forests, over streams, up the rugged slope of Mount Cyllene, each step carrying him closer to the truth. He reached Maia's cave with a calm so deep that even the wind dared not disturb it. The entrance was veiled by vines and olive branches, untouched since dawn. Apollo stepped inside, and golden light filled the cavern, illuminating every crevice. Maia startled awake, her eyes widening in confusion, her body stiff with the instinct to protect her child. But Apollo did not look at her. His gaze went immediately to the winnowing basket. Inside lay Hermes, wrapped in lamb's wool, sleeping or pretending to sleep with a stillness too perfect to be natural. Apollo approached slowly. His voice was soft, but edged with the weight of divine authority. "Little one," he murmured, "you have traveled far for someone so newly born." Hermes did not move. His breathing was steady, light, almost poetic in its innocence. Maia looked from Apollo to her child, suspicion rising inside her like storm clouds over a calm sea. "My son has not left this cave," she insisted quietly, her voice trembling. But Apollo heard the faint echo of deception still clinging to the cave walls, the subtle magical residue of reversed hoofprints, the whisper of reeds tied into sandals, the lingering rhythm of a newborn's cunning. "Hermes," Apollo said again, "wake up." Hermes slowly opened his eyes, wide, dark, shimmering with feigned confusion. He blinked at the radiant god towering above him. Then he yawned, a tiny, theatrically innocent yawn. Apollo raised an eyebrow. Hermes stretched his arms like a child waking from the gentlest nap, his expression perfectly crafted to convey bewilderment. "Brother," he murmured, the words soft as mist, "why are you here?" Apollo folded his arms. "Because my cattle are not." Hermes blinked again, tilting his head with such practiced naivete that even Maia hesitated, wondering if perhaps Apollo was mistaken. "Cattle?" Hermes echoed softly. I am only a baby." He held out his hands, small, delicate, undeniably infant-like, as though presenting proof of his innocence. It was a performance worthy of the Muses. But Apollo was not fooled. Still, there was something almost endearing about the audacity. Before he could speak further, the cave began to vibrate with a gentle hum, a sign of divine arrival. A moment later, Zeus appeared, his presence filling the chamber with a quiet thunder that made the crystals pulse with light. Maia bowed her head. Hermes watched with interest, his eyes gleaming knowingly. Apollo stepped back, though not in fear and respect. "Father," he said calmly, "your child has stolen my sacred cattle." Zeus looked from Apollo to Hermes, then to Maia, then back to Hermes, the tiny god who gazed up at him with the innocent confidence of someone who had already stolen the sun god's livestock and taken a nap afterward. "Hermes," Zeus said gently, "is this true?" Hermes placed a hand over his heart. "Father," he whispered, "how could I? I was born only yesterday." Zeus' mustache twitched, the divine equivalent of a suppressed smile. He knew his son, knew the spark of cunning that lived behind those dark eyes. But he also knew the value of this moment. Conflict between young gods could shape destinies, better to guide than punish. "Show him," Zeus said softly. Hermes blinked, then sighed a tiny, theatrical sigh of surrender. He climbed out of the basket with surprising grace for an infant and walked toward a small corner of the cave where he had hidden the lyre. The instrument shimmered with the soft glow of reeds, sinew, and polished tortoise shell. Hermes lifted it carefully and carried it toward Apollo. The sun god's eyes widened slightly. He recognized craftsmanship immediately, delicate, ingenious, filled with cosmic harmony. Hermes held the lyre out to him with both hands. "I made this," he said simply, "for you." Apollo hesitated, not out of suspicion, but out of awe. He took the lyre, running his fingers over the smooth shell, the carefully carved holes, the taut strings of sacred sinew. He plucked one string. A note rang out so pure, so resonant, it seemed to quiet even the air around them. He plucked another, then another. Music filled the cave, shimmering like sunlight refracted through water, soft yet powerful, ancient yet newborn. The melody rippled through the stone, through the hearts of everyone present. Apollo's anger eased instantly. Peace settled over him like a warm cloak. He looked at Hermes, no longer with frustration but with growing admiration. "You," he murmured, "are remarkable." Hermes smiled a small, knowing smile, gentle and bright. "I only wished to make something beautiful," he said softly. "And now it is yours." Zeus nodded, pleased. "A fair trade," he declared. The cattle returned, the lyre gifted, harmony restored. Apollo did not protest. The lyre felt right in his hands. It felt destined. And in that moment, the sun god and the infant trickster forged something rare among deities. A bond not of fear or rivalry, but of mutual respect. A bond born from mischief, transformed into friendship. Apollo extended a hand not in authority, but in brotherhood. Hermes reached up and placed his small hand in Apollo's larger one. Maia exhaled with relief. Zeus smiled, proud of the cleverness and diplomacy that flowed as naturally through Hermes' breath. The confrontation had become a reconciliation. The tension had given way to harmony, and the newborn god, in his first day of life, had moved from troublemaker to recognized member of Olympus. For Hermes, it was not just forgiveness, it was acknowledgement, a silent agreement among gods that cunning, when used with grace, could build bridges instead of burning them. Apollo turned toward the cave entrance, lyre in hand, the strings still vibrating from the divine notes he had played. "Welcome to Olympus, little brother," he said softly. Hermes bowed his head with innocent sincerity, though his eyes sparkled with the brilliant mischief of a god who would never stop exploring the boundaries of possibility. And as Apollo left, rays of sunlight danced along the cave walls like falling gold. The air was warm, the silence peaceful. Hermes climbed back into his basket with calm satisfaction, pulling the wool around him once more. This time, he did not feign innocence. He simply rested, content, recognized, and quietly triumphant. A newborn, yes, but also a god whose cleverness would shape the paths of mortals and immortals alike. And Arcadia, ancient and silent, held the memory of the moment when sunlight and shadow became brothers. The air on Olympus that morning felt unusually still, as if the heavens themselves paused to witness a quiet and important ceremony. Hermes awoke from his basket with the easy calm of someone who had already taken his first steps into legend. Word of his cleverness had spread like a warm breeze across the slopes of Arcadia and up to the marble halls of Olympus. Zeus, ever watchful and amused, had decided it was time to give formal recognition to the child who moved so easily between light and shadow. Invitations, unspoken and divine, rippled outward, and soon a small company of gods gathered in a chamber that overlooked the world. They stood not in ostentation, but in a kind of attentive hush, as if respect for the moment outweighed the desire for spectacle. Maia stood at Hermes' side, pride and exhaustion softening her features into a smile that could not be hidden. Hermes himself appeared calm and curious, his dark eyes reflecting the slow turning of clouds beyond the palace colonnades. Zeus descended with a gentle inevitability, the king's presence folding around the gathered gods like a warm cloak. He looked at Hermes with a father's amusement and a ruler's clarity, weighing both the infant's mischief and his usefulness to the order of Olympus. Then, in tones that were both formal and kind, Zeus spoke of roles and responsibilities, of borders that needed crossing, and messages that needed bearing. He explained that Olympus required a being who could travel where others could not, a mediator capable of soothing anger and a messenger swift enough to carry the will of gods and kings alike. Hermes listened, absorbing each word like a student of destiny. Zeus extended his hand and, with a motion both ancient and solemn, placed 3 tokens of office into Hermes' small palm. The first was the caduceus, the staff entwined by twin serpents, and crowned with wings, a symbol already heavy with meaning and history. Zeus described it as more than ornament. The caduceus carried the power of diplomatic immunity, the authority to move unharmed through hostile domains, and the ability to guide souls between life and the afterlife. It embodied a strange combination of opposites, restraint and command, gentleness and coercion, the quiet art of negotiation that could silence conflicts without spilling blood. Hermes felt the weight of it in his hand like a promise. The serpents that twined around the staff represented duality, wisdom and cunning, temptation and healing, always circling yet never consuming one another. The tiny wings at its top suggested movement without haste, a flight that respected boundaries even as it crossed them. With the caduceus, Hermes would carry not only messages but authority. He would have the right to negotiate and to compel, to calm a panicked heart or steer a lost spirit safely through shadowed paths. The second gift Zeus set upon Hermes' feet were the winged sandals, delicate, feathered things that seemed to shimmer with the same light as dawn herself. They were fashioned from leathers imbued with ambrosia, their little wings capable of unfurling into swift motion or folding into subtle fluttering that left barely a whisper on the air. These sandals promised a freedom unlike any other, the power to cross oceans and mountains, to step from a mortal road into the streets of a city in the blink between heartbeats, to move between worlds where others could not follow. But Zeus warned that freedom required responsibility. Speed without judgment could create chaos, and so Hermes must learn to use swiftness with wisdom. Hermes slipped the sandals on as if they had been made for him alone, and instantly the world seemed to shift, the air around his feet humming with potential. The third item was quieter, but no less powerful. The petasos, the broad-brimmed traveler's hat, soft and practical yet woven with a subtle, almost magical care. This hat would serve Hermes in ways more than one. It could shield him from the sun and rain, but it could also render him partially unseen, a cloak of anonymity that allowed observation without interference. The petasos offered the ability to become both present and unnoticed, to listen where loudness would be dangerous, and to blend with crowds where secrecy mattered. Together, these 3 artifacts formed a unity of purpose. The caduceus gave authority, the sandals motion, the hat discretion. Zeus spoke of them as instruments of balance, instruments that would allow Hermes to move between gods and mortals, between the living and the dead, between contracts and chaos. Other gods murmured their assent, not with cold formality but with a warm acknowledgement of the necessity of such a role. Apollo, still warmed by the memory of the lyre Hermes had gifted him, gave a slight nod, as if passing a private blessing from one musician to another. Hera's expression remained guarded, but even she could not deny the logicfulness of an office that helped maintain order in a world of such beautiful complication. Hermes received each symbol with a solemn joy, aware that each would guide him as much as he would shape their meaning with deeds yet to come. Zeus then pronounced formally that Hermes would be recognized among the Olympians as the messenger and guide, the patron of travelers, merchants, and all who crossed borders. From that moment, Hermes' name would be associated with the art of transition, between cities, between people, between ideas. The gods applauded softly, not in riotous celebration but in the calm, respectful clapping of hands that had seen many ages and recognized an apt choice. Hermes bowed, not with the obsequiousness of a petitioner, but with the attentive humility of one who understood that gifts given bore obligations in their seams. Maia wept quietly, tears that were not of sorrow but of a mother's fierce pride at seeing her child welcomed into the ranks of immortality. Hermes placed the caduceus across his shoulder, felt the wings of his sandals twitch with readiness, and tipped his petasos in a gentle gesture of thanks. He understood then how deeply his nature matched the role he had been given. Born between darkness and dawn, adept at slipping through cracks and reconciling contradiction, he would be the mediator who could speak in tones that eased wrath, the courier who could carry news late into the night, the god who could teach merchants the ethics of fair trade and travelers the prudence of careful routes. Over time, stories would grow around these symbols, tales of how the caduceus calmed hostile spirits, how the sandals sped messengers across battlefields, how the petasos let Hermes listen to secrets and return with solutions. Temples and shrines would rise at crossroads and ports, little columns known as Hermes marking property and passage, and merchants would whisper prayers to him before long voyages. But in that chamber, in that soft and sunlit moment, Hermes stood quietly between parentage and purpose, newly adorned with tools that matched his heart. He felt both the thrill of freedom and the gravity of duty. The world beyond Olympus would call on him for swiftness, for cunning, for mercy, and for cleverness that healed rather than harmed. And he, child of Maia and Zeus, born in a cave and already woven into the fabric of destiny, accepted it all with a smile that was more thoughtful than mischievous for once. As the gods dispersed, each returning to their own immortal tasks, Hermes lingered a moment beneath the colonnades and looked out across the world he had just been entrusted to serve. Mountains rolled into plains, cities glimmered at the edges of the sea, and in every place between there would be paths, bargains, farewells, and reunions that needed his footsteps. He drew the caduceus close, flexed the wings at his sandals, and adjusted his petasos as if testing the feel of the world under his new authority. Then, as if to honor the quiet beginning of his strange and tireless life, he walked toward the eastern colonnade, where dawn painted the sky in gentle pastels, and stepped lightly into the day, now truly, officially, a god of movement, trade, and negotiation. And Arcadia, far below, wrapped in mist, seemed to breathe in approval, carrying the echo of that ordination into every road and market that would one day whisper Hermes' name. In the quiet hours between night and dawn, when the world feels suspended in a breath it has not yet released, a soul slips free from the body that once held it. The moment is soft, almost imperceptible, like a candle flame flickering one last time before dimming into memory. The soul begins to drift upward, weightless and uncertain, still tethered faintly to the place it once called home. For 3 days this delicate thread remains, a shimmering link between the living world and the passage that waits beyond. During this time the soul observes without understanding, hearing voices not meant for its new form, feeling emotions that no longer belong to it. Often there is confusion, sometimes fear, and always a longing for someone to show the way forward. And that is when Hermes comes, not with thunder or grandeur, not with blazing divine light, but with a gentle radiance that soothes rather than startles. He appears as a silhouette at first, outlined in a soft glow that pushes back the shadows without scaring them away. His winged sandals make no sound as he approaches, and even the air seems to calm at his arrival. The soul senses him before seeing him fully, feeling a warmth that is neither earthly nor overwhelming, but familiar in a way that cannot be explained. Hermes kneels beside the soul, his caduceus shimmering faintly, the twin serpents carved along its shaft seeming to shift with a life of their own. His voice is gentle, almost like the breath of a lullaby. "It's time," he whispers. "Come with me, and I will guide you where you need to go." The soul reaches for him instinctively, its form drawn to the calm authority in his presence, the promise of safe passage woven into his very being. And so the journey begins. Hermes leads the soul across a threshold invisible to mortal eyes, a shimmering boundary between the world of breath and the world of echoes. The place they enter is quiet, not empty, but filled with the hushed reverence of sacred transit. It is a landscape of twilight hues, where pathways stretch like silver ribbons beneath a sky that glows without a sun. Hermes walks with steady steps, his sandals gliding effortlessly over terrain that shifts from shadowed plains to gentle slopes shaped by ancient memory. The soul follows closely, comforted by the god who moves with such serene purpose. Sometimes Hermes glances back to offer a reassuring smile, as if reminding the soul that nothing in this journey is to be feared. "We walk at your pace," he says softly. "Nothing here will hurry you." As they travel, Hermes points to subtle landmarks, faded trees with branches like reaching hands, small pools of still water that reflect not faces but moments from the soul's life. He does not linger on these memories, nor does he force the soul to confront them. He simply acknowledges them with a quiet nod, allowing the journey to unfold with the gentleness of drifting snow. Eventually the twilight path begins to dim, and Hermes slows his pace. Ahead lies a dark expanse, vast and silent, stretching endlessly beneath a sky that looks like deep swirling ink. This is the edge of the underworld's boundary. A wind stirs, not cold but solemn, carrying with it the muted echoes of countless souls who passed this way before. Hermes stops and turns to the soul, lifting his caduceus. The staff glows faintly, sending ripples of pale light across the ground, parting the shadows ahead. "This way," he whispers. A narrow road appears, its edges marked by stones ancient enough to remember the birth of the gods. Hermes proceeds, his glow lighting the path, and the soul follows with renewed trust. Soon the distant sound of flowing water reaches them, a gentle but persistent current, rhythmic like the beating of a cosmic heart. The river Styx. Its surface is dark and glassy, reflecting faint stars from realms unknown, while the banks are lined with mist that curls like sleeping spirits. At the water's edge waits Charon, the ferryman, his figure tall and cloaked, his presence solemn but not cruel. His boat is long, narrow, and silent, drifting slightly with the pulse of the river's current. Charon looks up as Hermes approaches, and something like recognition flickers beneath his hood. Hermes inclines his head respectfully. "This one is ready," he says. Charon nods, accepting the soul without question. For Hermes is the only being permitted to escort the newly departed across boundaries without needing fare or permission. The soul hesitates at the boat's edge, glancing back at the god who brought it here. Hermes rests a hand on its shoulder, warm and steady. "You are not alone," he murmurs. "I will walk beside you until the final gate." The soul steps into the boat, and Charon pushes off with his long pole, sending them gliding into the river's dark embrace. Hermes walks along the shoreline, matching the boat's slow and steady pace. The river widens, the current deepening into something ancient and unfathomable, but always calm when Hermes is near. At moments, the soul looks back, and Hermes raises his caduceus in a soft greeting, the wings atop it glowing like tiny lanterns in the gloom. When the boat reaches the far bank, the path ahead grows darker, shaped not by fear but by solemn necessity. Cerberus waits there, the great three-headed hound whose duty is to guard the entrance to the realm of Hades. His massive forms tower above the shoreline, muscles rippling beneath fur black as night, eyes watching with ancient vigilance. To most souls, his presence would be terrifying, but Hermes steps forward with calm familiarity. Cerberus recognizes him immediately, All three heads bow slightly, their growls softening into a deep rumble that resembles a purr more than a threat. Hermes speaks to the hound in a language older than rivers, stroking the middle head gently. "Let this one pass," he says. Cerberus steps aside, granting the soul a clear path through the gate. Together, Hermes and the soul walk into the dim corridor beyond, where the air grows cooler and heavier with the weight of eternity. At the end of the corridor stands a tall archway carved from stone older than Olympus, decorated with symbols of fate, sleep, and memory. Hermes pauses here, for this is the final threshold he may cross with the soul before handing it to the realm's ruler. Beyond this gate, Hades waits not with malice, but with the solemn dignity of a king who maintains the balance of all things. Hermes turns to the soul, offering a final, gentle smile. "From here," he says quietly, "your journey continues with others." His voice holds no sadness, only a deep and serene respect. "You have walked bravely. I will carry news of your passage to those who remember you." The soul gazes at him, no longer frightened, no longer confused, but calm, prepared, and perhaps even grateful. It steps through the archway, into the vast hall where Hades awaits, his shadow long but his presence steady. Hermes lingers only a moment longer, ensuring the soul is received with dignity. Then he turns back, lifting his caduceus, and retraces his steps through the corridor. The journey home is always quieter. Hermes moves with soft footfalls, passing Cerberus once more, nodding to the hound who keeps his eternal watch. Charon bows his head as Hermes passes by the riverbank, acknowledging the god who alone may walk both banks freely. Soon the twilight pathways open again into the world above, where dawn begins its climb up the horizon. Hermes emerges into early light, his form glowing faintly as the sun stretches its first warm fingers across the sky. He breathes in the scent of pine, earth, and morning wind smells of the living world that greet him after every journey into the quiet below. Another soul has found its way, another passage completed with peace. Hermes adjusts his petasos, the brim casting a soft shadow across his face, and begins walking once more, for he is the bridge between realms, the quiet guide, the gentle lantern in the dark, and wherever a soul takes its final breath, Hermes will be there, steady, patient, and kind, ready to whisper, "It's time, come with me." There is a particular kind of stillness that settles over a crossroads at dawn, the kind that feels like the world holding its breath, waiting for someone to choose a path. In ancient Greece, people believed those places, those quiet meeting points of possibility, belonged to Hermes, for at the heart of every journey is a decision, and Hermes, god of boundaries and transitions, watched over those who stood at the threshold of direction. To honor him, the Greeks erected Hermes' stone pillars crowned with his carved head and marked with sacred symbols that stood at every major crossroads, border, and marketplace. These pillars were simple in shape, square and unadorned except for the watchful face of Hermes, yet the presence they carried was unmistakable. Travelers would pause before them, resting their burdens, touching the stone for luck, or whispering prayers into the morning air. Merchants placed offerings of coins, oil, or small tokens of their trade, hoping for safe passage through strange cities and distant coasts. Farmers, soldiers, wandering poets all sought Hermes' blessing before stepping onto the open road. The Hermes were more than markers, they were companions, silent guardians of movement, reminders that no journey is made entirely alone. At night, a flickering torch might illuminate one of these pillars, casting Hermes' carved features into gentle relief, as though he were watching the footsteps of those who passed. And in the early hours, when fog drifted low across the landscape, Hermes seemed almost alive sentinels carved from earth yet filled with divine intention. Why did the Greeks place their trust in Hermes at such intersections? Because crossroads were places of uncertainty, places where one could lose their way or find it. places where fate could shift with a single step. Hermes, master of boundaries, understood the delicate tension between choices. He knew that every road carried its own story, and so he offered guidance not by force but by gentle presence. A traveler who touched a Herm might suddenly feel clarity, a moment of intuition, a whisper of which path held danger and which held promise. In a world without maps, street signs, or guiding lamps, Hermes was the compass that needed no direction written in ink. But his influence extended far beyond dusty paths and forested crossroads. Hermes was the patron of commerce, the invisible architect behind the movement of goods, stories, and people across the entire Mediterranean world. Merchants revered him deeply, for trade in ancient times was risky and unpredictable, a venture that could bring prosperity or ruin. Storms could swallow ships whole. Pirates prowled the sea lanes. Foreign markets operated under unfamiliar customs. And yet trade continued, thriving, connecting distant realms through networks of trust as fragile as they were essential. Hermes stood at the center of this fragile web. Before embarking on a journey, merchants would pray to him at small shrines built in ports and coastal cities. Offerings were modest honeycakes, wine, incense, but they were given with earnest hearts. Because Hermes did more than safeguard merchants from danger, he shaped the very structure of commerce itself. He inspired the creation of standardized weights and measures, a revolutionary advancement that allowed merchants from far-off lands to trade fairly and efficiently without fear of deceit or miscalculation. This standardization created trust, and trust created the bustling markets that lined the Mediterranean coastline. Cities like Athens, Corinth, Miletus, and Rhodes owed much of their prosperity to systems of trade that flowed under Hermes' quiet supervision. Merchants invoked his name when sealing contracts, believing that breaking a bargain under his watchful gaze would invite misfortune, lost cargo, or the failure of future deals. And because commerce involved travel, Hermes' dual identity as patron of merchants and travelers made him indispensable. In the bustling agora, the heart of Greek urban life, statues and miniature Hermes stood among stalls of pottery, olive oil, textiles, and spices. Their stone faces watched over negotiations and exchanges, offering silent assurance that fairness and good faith would be rewarded. In these markets, a coin bearing Hermes' image symbolized not just currency, but the divine protection of honest commerce. It is said that some of the earliest Greek coins carried symbols connected to Hermes' winged motifs, caduceus markings, or his youthful profile, signifying speed, trade, and trustworthy exchange. These coins traveled across seas, through deserts, into foreign ports, each one a small messenger in its own right, echoing Hermes' essence. Through them, his influence spread beyond Greece, touching the ports of Egypt, the marketplaces of Phoenicia, the trade posts of Asia Minor, and the colonies scattered across distant coastlines. As merchants sailed through waters unpredictable as fate itself, they carried with them small shrines or talismans dedicated to Hermes, tokens of hope that wind and tide would remain kind. And when storms rose, it was his name they cried, trusting that the god of travel understood their vulnerability and would guide their ship towards safety. Hermes' responsibilities extended inland as well. He watched over traders crossing mountains, lone wanderers on forest paths, and caravans journeying from city to city with goods lashed tightly to their backs. He was the unseen companion walking beside them, the soft whisper that urged caution at the turn of a narrow ridge, the subtle reassurance that danger could be avoided if one paid attention to the world's quiet cues. At every boundary, whether between nations, properties, or even states of being, Hermes was present. He oversaw the placing of boundary stones, the division of land, and the recognition of property rights. Each Hermes set at a border was not only a physical marker but a legal declaration, sanctified by the god who ensured that agreements held firm and disputes could be settled with fairness and clarity. Travelers took comfort in knowing that Hermes stood guard at transitions where one territory ended and another began, where a familiar road gave way to uncertainty, where the known world faded into the unknown. Even in Greek homes, small household Hermes stood near doorways or courtyards, subtle reminders that every threshold was sacred. Passing by the stone pillar each morning and evening, families would nod respectfully or offer a small gesture of acknowledgement, grateful for the god who kept the flow of life gentle and steady. And as night fell, when the wind quieted and shadows lengthened, crossroads took on a deeper significance. In these hours the Hermes seemed almost alive, their carved faces softened by starlight, as if they listened to the whispered prayers of restless travelers, deciding whether to wait for dawn or venture out under the moon. Hermes' presence in these moments was silent, but unmistakable, a comforting weight in the air, a stillness that said, "You are not alone on this road." For Hermes understood movement in all its forms, the traveling of souls, of goods, of ideas, and of people who placed their fate in the journey ahead. He knew how every path led to another, how every footstep echoed through the great tapestry of the world, and he cherished those who dared to step onto the road, who trusted uncertainty enough to move forward, who carried their hopes from one city to the next. In this way, Hermes became more than the god of travelers and merchants. He became the guardian of possibility itself. Every crossroad belonged to him. Every trade agreement carried his breath. Every safe arrival at a distant city was a quiet testament to his protection. And so, through the centuries, the people of Greece believed that when they reached a turning point, literal or metaphorical, they should pause at the Hermes standing beside the road, place a hand upon its stone surface, and breathe deeply. Because at that moment, between what has been and what will be, Hermes was there, watching, guiding, smiling in the shadow of a choice. There are moments in the lives of gods when their cleverness, their swiftness, and even their mischief become something more, something quiet, graceful, and deeply necessary. For Hermes, these moments came in the form of missions entrusted to him by Zeus, missions that required not brute strength but understanding, subtlety, and heart. They were tasks that other gods could not accomplish without chaos, tasks that demanded gentleness wrapped in strategy, or strategy softened by compassion. And so, in these most delicate situations, Zeus turned to the one deity who could walk through conflict as peacefully as he walked through sunlight. The first of these great missions began with Io, a mortal priestess of Hera, whose beauty drew Zeus' gaze and ignited a terrible chain of events. To hide her from Hera's wrath, Zeus transformed Io into a white heifer, a creature both pure and vulnerable. But Hera was not deceived. She demanded the heifer as a gift, and Zeus, bound by divine protocol, could not refuse. Once Io was in her possession, Hera set Argus Panoptes to guard her, a giant with 100 eyes, none of which slept fully at the same time. Argus was vigilance incarnate, the perfect sentinel. No shadow escaped him, no trick could fool him. And yet Zeus needed Io freed. He needed someone to lull the 100 eyes into sleep without force, someone who could approach without disturbing even one vigilant gaze. He needed Hermes. Hermes traveled to the pasture where Argus guarded Io, carrying only his reed pipes and the calm confidence that always accompanied him. He approached not as a warrior but as a shepherd, slow in step, gentle in presence, serene in tone. Argus watched him, all eyes alert, suspicious of any newcomer. But Hermes did not hide. He sat upon a stone, crossed his legs, and began to play. The melody unfurled like a ribbon of silver, delicate and winding, weaving through the air in soft arcs of sound. Argus listened, curious. Hermes shifted the tune slower, smoother, a sound shaped like drifting clouds or the hush of evening's first breeze. The giant's eyes blinked, not in alarm, but in the heavy rhythm of someone surrendering to warmth and memory. Hermes told stories, two quiet pastoral tales, gentle myths of rivers and nymphs, spoken with the unhurried cadence of someone singing a lullaby to the dawn. One eye closed, then another, then 10, then 40, and Hermes continued to play, patient as stone, soft as dusk falling over the mountains. Finally, all 100 eyes shut at once, plunging Argus into a deep and peaceful sleep. Only then did Hermes rise, draw a single clean blade, and end the giant's duty with mercy swift enough not to disturb his slumber. Io was free. Hermes touched her brow with compassion, guiding her away from that field of sorrow, and sending her down the road that would eventually lead to her healing. In that moment, Hermes' cunning became tenderness, and his gentleness became power. The next great mission required not only wisdom but mentorship. Perseus, the mortal son of Zeus, had been tasked with slaying Medusa, the only mortal Gorgon whose gaze could turn any living creature to stone. It was an impossible task for a human, but Perseus was never meant to be alone. Zeus sent Hermes to guide him, and Hermes came bearing tools forged from divine purpose. First, he offered Perseus the winged sandals, the very ones he himself wore, granting the hero the ability to move with the speed of wind and the grace of birds in flight. Then he placed in Perseus' hands a polished sword of adamantine, sharp enough to cut through scales hard as destiny's iron. Hermes trained him in silence first, teaching him how to use peripheral sight and reflected glimpses instead of direct gaze. For direct sight meant death. He instructed Perseus in patience, timing, and movement that respected both danger and opportunity. He taught him that courage is not boldness but clarity in the midst of fear. And when Perseus journeyed to the Gorgon's lair, Hermes walked in the shadows beside him unseen, silent, vigilant. Even when Athena provided the great bronze shield that served as Perseus' mirror, it was Hermes who explained how to angle it, how to read its reflections as if reading the ripples on a quiet lake. When the moment came, and Medusa lay sleeping among coiled serpents and stone statues of those who had looked upon her, Perseus moved with the precision Hermes had instilled in him. And when the deed was done, when the head of the Gorgon was secured and the world had gained a new hero, Hermes stood at Perseus' side, proud not of victory but of courage shaped gently over time. But perhaps the greatest mission Hermes ever undertook for Zeus was one woven not from strategy or cunning but from empathy. It happened during the Trojan War, long after the great clash of gods and heroes had shaken the world. King Priam of Troy, old and grieving, had seen his noble son Hector fall at the hands of Achilles. Worse still, Achilles, consumed by rage and sorrow after the death of Patroclus, refused Hector's body the dignity of burial. For days, Priam mourned not only his son's death but the torment of knowing his child's body lay unhonored. Finally, driven by a grief deeper than fear, Priam made the decision to go himself into the heart of the Greek camp, to plead with Achilles for the return of his son's body. It was an act of courage few mortals could ever imagine, but no mortal could reach Achilles alone. The Greek camp was a labyrinth of danger, guarded by warriors who would not hesitate to strike down a Trojan king. And so Zeus sent Hermes. Hermes appeared to Priam not in fearsome glory but in humble form. As a young Greek soldier offering quiet assistance, he approached the old king gently, with the respect of a grandson approaching a beloved elder. Priam, weary with grief, accepted the stranger's help without knowing the truth of his identity. Hermes guided him through the night, slipping silently past sentries whose eyes grew heavy under his influence. He led Priam along narrow paths through the camp, making sure each step went unnoticed. Each shadow moved like water around them. The old king walked slowly, leaning heavily on his staff, his breath trembling with sorrow. Hermes walked beside him with patience, never rushing, never allowing fear to disturb the fragile resolve that kept Priam moving forward. When Priam stumbled, Hermes steadied him. When Priam faltered, Hermes whispered, "You are not alone." And all the while, The Greek warriors slept more deeply than usual, as though Hermes had woven moonlight into their dreams. Eventually they reached the tent of Achilles, where the firelight flickered softly against the hide walls. Hermes touched Priam's shoulder, allowing the king to step forward alone, for what came next belonged to mortals, to love, to loss, to forgiveness. Priam entered, bowed before Achilles, and kissed his hands, the very hands that had killed his son. The gesture broke Achilles' fury like a wave collapsing into sand. Together they wept, not as enemies but as fathers who understood each other's suffering. Hermes stood outside the tent, silent as dawn, ensuring they were not disturbed, allowing grief to soften into reconciliation. When the meeting was done, and the promise of Hector's proper burial secured, Hermes guided Priam safely back through the camp, unseen as before. He brought the king all the way to his chariot, touched the horses' manes, and whispered a blessing. Only then did he reveal his true identity, bowing to the mortal who had shown more courage than many gods ever would. Priam's eyes filled with awe and gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. Hermes only nodded. "Love guides even the greatest of journeys," he said softly. "May it carry you home." And so Hermes became known not merely as the messenger of the gods, nor as the trickster of Olympus, but as the one who could walk with mortals in their deepest moments of need. He freed the suffering, empowered the brave, and comforted the grieving. His missions for Zeus were never about proving strength. They were about proving heart. There are few stories in the old myths as tender and as quietly heroic as the bond between Hermes and the infant Dionysus. It is a story not of grand battles or divine rivalries, but of protection born from love and of a god who understood that the smallest lives sometimes needed the greatest care. Dionysus' story began in danger. When Hera discovered that yet another of Zeus' affairs had resulted in a child, her fury burned hotter than any forge. Semele, the mortal mother of Dionysus, had already perished from the overwhelming sight of Zeus' revealed glory, leaving the unborn child fragile and vulnerable inside her dying womb. Zeus saved the infant by stitching him into his own thigh, carrying him until the time was right for birth, an act both miraculous and strange. But salvation from mortality was not salvation from Hera. Her wrath still hunted the child who embodied Zeus' latest betrayal. And so Zeus turned to the only god who could move quietly enough, gently enough, wisely enough to protect a child who should never have had to fear for his life. He turned to Hermes. Hermes understood immediately what the task required. It was not brute force. It was not confrontation. It was not persuasion. It was movement hidden, quiet, strategic movement through shadows and safe places, woven like a thread through the loom of the world. When Zeus placed the newborn Dionysus in his arms, Hermes held the child with a tenderness that surprised even himself. The baby was warm, small, half mortal yet entirely divine, blinking at the world with eyes unclouded by fear. Hermes wrapped him in a cloak woven from mountain wool, and without a sound, began the long journey away from Olympus. Hera's spies were already searching. The first safe house Hermes chose was the palace of King Athamas and Queen Ino, Semele's sister, who agreed to raise the child as their own out of loyalty and sorrow. Hermes disguised Dionysus, softening his divine aura, wrapping him in illusion so subtle even Hera's watchful gaze would overlook him. For a time, all was peaceful. Ino cradled him as if he were truly hers, humming mortal lullabies that wrapped around the child like soft vines. Hermes watched from the shadows, ensuring no divine trace betrayed the infant's true lineage. But Hera's anger ran deeper than mortal love could shield. Soon, whispers began echoing in her ear, carried by corrupted nymphs and wandering spirits who scoured the land. She sent madness into the home of Athamas and Ino, twisting their minds, shattering the fragile sanctuary Hermes had built. The safe house could no longer hold. Hermes arrived in a breath of wind, plucked Dionysus from his cradle, and fled once more into the night. The second safe house lay deep in the mountains of Nysa, hidden among ivy-draped cliffs and forests, where nymphs loyal to Zeus tended the land. These nymphs, untouched by Hera's influence, received Dionysus with open arms. Hermes taught them the routines of protection, how to shroud Dionysus' light from divine detection, how to build boundaries that were spiritual rather than physical. In this safe haven, Dionysus learned to walk, to laugh, to touch the cool leaves of grapevines that curled naturally toward him, drawn by his future. Hermes visited often, sometimes appearing with fresh fruit, sometimes with toys carved from olive wood, and sometimes simply with stories. He told the child tales of stars, of rivers that whispered secrets, of crossroads that led not to places but to possibilities. Dionysus watched him with wide, bright eyes, absorbing every word, but Hera's reach was long. Whispers of the child's presence drifted through the forest, carried by harpies whose wings rattled like warning bells. Hermes sensed the shift immediately. The safe house was no longer safe. Once more, he gathered the child who now clung to him with small, trusting hands and slipped into the hidden paths known only to gods of movement. The third safe house was not a house at all, but a sanctuary shaped by the sea. Hermes carried Dionysus to the island of the sea goddess Thetis, whose domain lay far from Hera's influence. Waves curled protectively around the shore, and the rocky cliffs shielded the infant from prying eyes. Thetis nurtured him, bathing him in seawater infused with divine calm, soothing his fears, strengthening his spirit. Hermes remained for a time, teaching Thetis subtle wards that cloaked the child in ocean mist. Here, Dionysus took his first steps across wet sand, leaving small footprints that the tide erased almost immediately. Hermes watched, smiling, as the boy giggled and chased small fish that flickered in shallow water. Still, even the sea could not shelter him forever. Hermes knew Hera's determination was tireless. No sanctuary would remain hidden for long, and so he prepared a fourth haven, a place more unusual, more creative, more fitting for a child whose destiny would one day reshape joy itself. The fourth safe house lay with the Hyads, a group of rain-bringing nymphs who lived far from the realms Hera often watched. These nymphs welcomed Dionysus with gentle songs and played with him beneath canopies of leaves where sunlight danced like liquid gold. They fed him honey from mountain hives and let him nap in soft beds of moss that smelled of spring rain. Hermes taught them how to read the subtle signs of Hera's agents approaching, how to recognize shifts in divine winds, how to keep Dionysus' aura hidden beneath layers of enchantment. And in those quiet days, he spent time not as a guardian but as a teacher. He showed Dionysus how to calm his thoughts by listening to the wind. He taught him how to recognize truth by listening to silence. And he taught him something deeper, how to face a world that would not always understand him. Their bond deepened. Dionysus began to recognize Hermes' steps before he appeared, turning toward him with open arms. Hermes would kneel, gathering the child close, letting him rest his head against his shoulder. Though he was the god of movement, in those moments he remained still anchored by the trust of a boy who saw in him not a trickster but a sanctuary. As Dionysus grew older, his divine nature blossomed. Vines sprang where his feet touched ground. Grapes ripened in his presence. Joy followed him like a soft fragrance on summer air. Hermes helped him understand this strange, growing power, guiding him gently through moments of overwhelm. "It is not a burden," Hermes said softly one evening as they sat beneath a tree, stars shimmering above. "It is a gift meant to make the world softer." Dionysus leaned into him. "And you?" he asked in a small voice. "What are you?" Hermes smiled, brushing a curl from the boy's forehead. "I am the one who walks between places," he answered, and I am always near when you need me." Years passed. Hera's hostility did not vanish, but the safe houses held, and Dionysus grew into a young god with a spirit both gentle and wild. When the time finally came for him to reveal himself to the world, to claim his place among the Olympians, it was Hermes who escorted him. Not with stealth now, but with pride. He had protected him, nurtured him, taught him, and now he delivered him home. At the gates of Olympus, Dionysus turned to Hermes one last time. The boy who had grown under his care was now radiant, confident, draped in vines and the scent of wine. "Will you still be there?" Dionysus asked quietly. "When I wander?" Hermes placed a hand on his shoulder, warm and steady. "I walk all roads," he said gently, "and wherever you go, I will find you." With that, Dionysus stepped onto Olympus as a true god of joy, transformation, and sacred ecstasy, and Hermes watched him with a heart full of something he seldom admitted to love. For though Hermes was the god of travelers and transitions, some journeys changed him too. And this journey, the long, hidden path of protecting and raising Dionysus, was one he would carry within him forever. There are some moments in a hero's life when strength alone cannot save him, when cunning falters, when courage becomes fragile beneath the weight of fear and illusion. It was at such a moment at the edge of Circe's isle, where the air shimmered with sorcery, that Odysseus found himself in desperate need of guidance. The winds had carried him and his weary men through storms and shadows, only to deliver them to this place where beauty concealed danger and hospitality was a mask for enchantment. One by one, his men had entered Circe's hall and never returned as men. Their voices had turned to squeals, their bodies bent into the shapes of animals. Their spirits collapsed beneath spells woven from ancient, seductive power. Odysseus stood alone on the forest path, his breath unsteady, torn between fear for his companions and dread of facing a witch whose magic had undone warriors mightier than himself. It was then, in the hush between two heartbeats, that Hermes appeared. The god descended like a quiet breeze through the trees, his presence softening the tension in the air. Dappled sunlight fell around him like falling petals, and the forest seemed to bow in subtle recognition. Odysseus did not startle. Instead, he felt a calmness wash over him, the kind that comes when a guide steps from silence with purpose. Hermes approached with the gentle confidence of one who walked freely through all worlds, untouched by fear or illusion. His winged sandals hovered just above the ground, stirring faint spirals of dust. His petasos shielded his face in soft shadow, but his eyes, bright, steady, ancient, held the warmth of a teacher meeting a student at a crossroads of destiny. "You fear her," Hermes said quietly, his voice carrying no judgment, only understanding. Odysseus bowed his head. "I fear what she can turn me into," he admitted. Hermes smiled with that almost playful wisdom unique to him. "She can transform bodies," he murmured, "but minds only if they allow themselves to fall." He reached into the folds of his cloak and revealed a small plant, a slender stem crowned with a pale blossom, simple yet radiant. "This," Hermes said, placing the herb gently into Odysseus' hand, "is moly." The flower glowed faintly, as though infused with starlight. Its roots were dark, its petals bright, a symbol of duality, resilience, and clarity. "It grows only where the earth whispers its secrets," Hermes continued softly. "It cannot be found by mortals, but it can protect the mind from illusion." Odysseus lifted the herb to his chest, feeling its cool energy steady his racing heartbeat. "Moly will keep your senses clear," Hermes said, "but it is only the first part of your defense." Odysseus looked up, confused. "There is more?" Hermes nodded slowly. "Circe's power lies not in her wand, but in the fear she awakens within her victims. She does not trap the body, first she traps the mind." Odysseus felt the truth of that settle into him like a stone dropped into still water. "So how do I resist her?" he asked. Hermes motioned for him to sit on a fallen log, a gesture as gentle as a parent guiding a child to rest. The god sat beside him, folding his legs with an effortless grace, the forest quieting around them as though eager to listen. "First," Hermes whispered, "you must learn to separate sight from belief." He raised his hand and let a tiny spark of golden light appear on his palm. Then he closed his fist, and when he opened it again, there was nothing, but Odysseus still felt the warmth. "What you see," Hermes said, "is not always what is. What you feel is not always truth. You must hold your mind like still water. Let illusions ripple on the surface, but do not let them disturb the depths." Odysseus inhaled slowly, letting the words seep into him. Hermes continued, his tone as soft as drifting smoke. "Second, you must control your breath. Enchantment feeds on panic on the moment your breath breaks its rhythm." He guided Odysseus through slow, deliberate inhalations. "Breathe as though you are drawing strength from the center of the earth," Hermes said. "And when fear rises, breathe deeper, not faster." Odysseus felt his heartbeat steady, the forest seeming to expand and soften around him. "Third," Hermes said, "you must name what you fear." He placed 2 fingers on Odysseus' forehead. "A fear unspoken grows, but a fear named shrinks." "Say it." Odysseus swallowed. "I fear losing myself," he whispered. Hermes nodded with quiet approval. "Then hold tight to the self you know." His voice fell to a tender hush. "Remember your name, your homeland, your wife's face, your son's small hands." Odysseus' eyes glistened, not from sorrow but from clarity. "Yes," Hermes murmured, "that is your anchor." He lifted the molly plant in Odysseus' hand. "This protects the body. Your spirit protects the mind." A long silence stretched between them, not empty, but full of understanding, of resolve gently taking shape, of fear softening into focus. Hermes spoke again. "One more thing," he said. "When Circe strikes, do not strike back. Let her magic wash over you. Let her see it fail. Then, when her certainty breaks, she will listen." Odysseus furrowed his brow. "You mean, speak to her?" Hermes smiled softly. "Even a sorceress is still a soul who longs to be understood." Another breeze passed through the trees, stirring the molly blossom in Odysseus' hand. Hermes rose, his movements fluid, graceful. "It is time," he said gently. Odysseus stood with him, feeling steadier than he had since his men were lost. Hermes leaned in close, his voice a whisper on the edge of thought. "Remember, illusions cannot pierce a mind that remains awake." He stepped back, raising his caduceus, and a warm glow encircled Odysseus. It was not protection against harm. Odysseus already held that, but a blessing of calm, clarity, and courage. Odysseus bowed deeply, gratitude filling his voice. "Hermes, whatever happens, I will remember your guidance." Hermes smiled with that serene, unfathomable kindness unique only to him. "And I," he said softly, "will be near, even if you do not see me." With a single beat of his winged sandals, he faded into the dappled light, dissolving like morning mist. Odysseus watched the empty space where the god had been, the forest now utterly still, holding its breath for the journey ahead. Then, gripping the molly tightly, he turned toward Circe's hall not with fear, but with a quiet mind shaped by wisdom. Hermes walked with him in spirit, step by step, whispering gently in his thoughts, "Hold the mind steady, and the world cannot bend it." Thus Odysseus advanced, calm as twilight, carrying not only a god's protection but a god's teaching, a teaching that would anchor him through many trials to come. The journey of Jason and his Argonauts is often remembered for its roaring seas, clashing cliffs, and heroes whose names echo through time. But beneath the thunder of adventure, beneath the loud songs and bold tasks, there was a quieter presence, one that shaped their path without ever demanding praise. This quiet presence was Hermes, for a voyage like Jason's did not simply require strength or courage. It required guidance, diplomacy, safe passage through realms where danger lived not only in monsters, but in the misunderstandings of men and gods. And Hermes, god of movement and messenger of peace, was the only deity who could slip beside the Argonauts unseen, adjusting the threads of fate with hands as light as breeze. When the Argo first touched the sea, its polished hull gleaming beneath the morning sun, Hermes stood on a distant cliff, watching. He did not join the heroes openly. That was not his way. Instead, he whispered to the winds, showing them how to fill the sails gently, steadily, without the tempests that so often plagued inexperienced sailors. The first days passed calmly, because Hermes willed the sea to cradle the ship rather than challenge it, offering the Argonauts a quiet beginning to a long and uncertain quest. As the Argo traveled farther from home, Hermes guided them along safe routes, pathways woven through the Aegean like threads of light. He nudged sea currents subtly, shifting the waters just enough to avoid reefs hidden beneath the shimmering blue. At times, a sudden gust carried them out of danger moments before they realized danger existed. Jason would look at the sky in gratitude, believing the winds favored him by chance. But Hermes was there, invisible among the clouds, making sure each choice led to safety rather than ruin. The Argonauts faced not only nature, but also foreign kings whose lands they entered, kings who were unpredictable, proud, and often hostile to strangers. Yet each time tensions rose, something intervened. A door opened before it slammed. A guard hesitated before striking. A ruler softened his expression when Jason spoke. These were not coincidences. Hermes, walking in the shadows of palace halls, whispered calm into the minds of those who held power, guiding them toward peace rather than conflict. He was the diplomat behind the diplomat, smoothing the world so Jason's words would land gently rather than spark war. When they reached the land of the Doleones, hospitality turned to tragedy as night confusion led to accidental bloodshed. The Argonauts were consumed with grief, believing the gods had abandoned them. But Hermes walked the shore at dawn, touching the water with his caduceus. Waves carried away the omen of guilt, replacing it with a breeze so soft it felt like forgiveness. The sorrow did not vanish, but it eased, allowing the men to continue their voyage without sinking beneath the weight of despair. In the land of the Bebrycians, where King Amycus forced strangers into deadly boxing matches, Hermes intervened with subtle influence. He guided Pollux strikes, not by force, but by sharpening the young hero's instincts. Each dodge became smoother. Each movement flowed like water finding its path. Pollux believed it was simply his training taking hold. But Hermes had whispered the rhythm of the fight into his limbs, ensuring victory without cruelty. The most perilous part of the journey came as they approached the clashing rocks, the Symplegades, two massive cliffs that smashed together with terrible force, threatening to crush any ship that dared pass. Panic rippled through the crew. Even seasoned heroes trembled at the sound of stone grinding against stone. Jason prayed loudly to every god he could name. In the silence that followed, Hermes stood on the highest of the two rocks, unseen, watching the sea spray rise around him. He did not stop the rocks that was not within his nature. Instead, he softened the timing. He slowed the rhythm. With gentle pressure from his foot, he nudged the great stones half a heartbeat wider apart. It was no miracle, just a moment, long enough for Jason's dove to fly through safely, long enough for the Argo to follow. The ship cleared the rocks by inches, but it cleared them. The Argonauts roared with triumph, unaware that Hermes had bought them those precious inches with silence and care. Later, when the men were exhausted and morale faltered, Hermes visited them in dreams. Each Argonaut dreamed of something that gave them strength. Some saw the faces of loved ones, others saw victories they had not yet won. These dreams were not random. Hermes crafted them carefully, stitching hope into their sleep so they would wake lighter than they lay down. He knew that even the bravest warriors could crumble without rest, so he gave them rest. When diplomacy was needed, Hermes nudged Jason's intuition. When a storm threatened, he whispered to the winds. When monsters stirred, he dulled their hunger with the soft pressure of divine suggestion. On one occasion, when the ship risked drifting toward a shoreline filled with hostile spirits, Hermes simply placed his hand upon the mast. The wood warmed beneath his touch, and the Argo shifted course as if guided by a will of its own. The Argonauts often spoke of luck, of chance, of the strange sense that someone unseen walked with them. Jason occasionally felt a presence, not alarming, but comforting, the feeling of being watched over by something patient, clever, and kind. He never knew it was Hermes. That was the beauty of it. Hermes never sought acknowledgement. His greatest works were the ones no one saw. Even when the mission was at its darkest, when the men doubted the fleece could be won or returned, Hermes wrapped the crew in a soft veil of fortitude. He steadied their hands, he lightened their steps, he dulled their fear without erasing it. Fear kept them cautious. Hermes never removed fear, only its sharpest edge. When the Argo finally turned homeward, carrying the golden fleece upon its mast, Hermes walked the length of the ship one last time. He touched each oar, each rope, each wooden plank, as though sealing them with safe passage. He looked at Jason, hero, leader, dreamer, and offered a smile too gentle to be seen. Then, with a flutter of winged sandals, he ascended into the sky. The Argonauts continued their journey, never knowing the quiet god who carved their path through danger. For Hermes did not help for glory. He helped because movement was sacred to him, movement across seas, across borders, across fear itself. And in guiding the Argonauts, he guided the world a little closer to its own unfolding destiny. Among all the gods of Olympus, Hermes is perhaps the hardest to place inside a single moral frame. He is neither wholly benevolent nor malicious, neither a guardian of purity nor an agent of chaos. Instead, he walks the thin line between the two, carrying in his heart a dual nature that resists simple definitions. This duality is not a contradiction. It is a harmony, one forged between light and shadow, truth and deception, innocence and cunning. To understand Hermes is to understand that morality is not always a straight road, but a winding path shaped by circumstance and intention. The Greeks knew this well, and so they called him not simply a messenger, but a trickster, a word that held both admiration and caution. Hermes' tricks were not empty pranks. They were mirrors that revealed the hidden rules beneath the world. Sometimes they corrected imbalance. Sometimes they protected the vulnerable. And sometimes they taught harsh lessons that even gods could not deliver with gentler hands. The first thing to understand about Hermes' trickster nature is that it always served purpose. His cunning was not designed to sow chaos for pleasure, nor to injure for sport. It emerged when the world needed a nudge, a clever adjustment, a subtle correction where brute force would only worsen the wound. In this way, Hermes could deceive without cruelty, and outsmart without seeking dominance. He used wit the way Apollo used music, precisely, elegantly, and only when necessary. This was cunning for balance, a phrase that best describes the majority of Hermes' legendary interventions. When mortals lied to one another with malice, Hermes revealed truth through misdirection. When kings abused their power, he slipped justice through their fingers like a quiet breeze. When travelers wandered into danger, he appeared as a humble guide, redirecting their fate with gentle cleverness rather than divine thunder. His deception was a tool, not a weapon. a lantern that shined precisely where shadows needed to soften. But Hermes also possessed the capacity to punish, not out of cruelty but out of necessity, out of the underlying cosmic order that governed promises, truth, and sacred boundaries. He was not a god who sought to destroy, but one who reminded mortals that actions carried consequences, even when those consequences arrived quietly. The story of Batis is perhaps the clearest example of this side of Hermes, and it is a story filled with paradox, sorrow, and an almost parental lesson. According to the file, Batis was a simple man, a shepherd who tended land near the place where Hermes hid the stolen cattle of Apollo during his famous early adventure. When Batis witnessed the theft, Hermes approached him not with threats but with a plea for silence, asking the shepherd to keep what he had seen a secret. Hermes even offered him a reward, placing a stone in his hand as a token of trust and promise. Batis agreed. His voice trembled with sincerity. His eyes held earnestness. But when Hermes left, Batis' resolve wavered. His loyalty shifted like sand in the wind, and soon, for the promise of richer gifts, he revealed Hermes' secret to others. Hermes returned not as a raging storm, but as a quiet shadow disguised in another form, asking Batis once again what he had seen. The shepherd betrayed the truth a second time, and in that moment, Hermes understood not only Batis' weakness, but the danger such weakness posed in a world where promises stitched trust together. So Hermes turned Batis to stone not in anger, but in a solemn act that preserved the lesson. A promise broken twice becomes a monument to the fragility of trust. The stone was not a curse. It was a reminder, a stillness in the world that whispered of the cost of deceit when it harmed the delicate threads of divine and mortal stability. In this story, we see Hermes not as a cruel god, but as one who acts from a deeper understanding of balance. His punishment was not the violent fury of Ares, nor the vindictive torment of Hera. It was a quiet correction, firm, necessary, and eternal. Batis was not destroyed. He was preserved, transformed into a symbol whose story lived longer than any mortal breath. This is cunning for harm, not harm for pleasure, but harm for equilibrium, a rebalancing act, a truth made solid. When we consider Hermes' nature through this lens, his duality becomes clearer. He is not defined by the choice between good and evil, but by the understanding that the world requires both gentleness and firmness, both mischief and honesty, both freedom and consequence. His tricks expose hidden truths. His lies reveal deeper realities. His punishments teach without cruelty. His kindness flows quietly, often unnoticed, until one looks back and sees how many dangers he has redirected, how many wounds he has prevented. Hermes is a god of thresholds of movement between states, and morality itself is one of those thresholds. He stands between intention and outcome, between desire and discipline, between impulse and wisdom, and like a guide standing at a crossroads, he gently nudges mortals and gods alike toward paths that reflect the balance the world needs, even when those paths are difficult. In him, cunning becomes compassion, deception becomes teaching, punishment becomes preservation, and the space between right and wrong becomes a place not of confusion, but of contemplation. Hermes invites us into that space, not to judge, not to fear, but to reflect, to understand that morality, like a journey, is rarely a straight line. In this way, the trickster god becomes not an agent of chaos, but a guardian of the fragile harmony that keeps the world turning, softly, quietly, and always with a smile that knows more than it says. Though Hermes was known for movement, cunning, and the quiet grace with which he slipped between worlds, there were moments in his long life when he paused, moments shaped not by duty but by affection. The stories of his loves are as varied as the paths he wandered, some divine, some mortal, all touched with the strange mixture of tenderness and mystery that followed wherever he walked. Unlike other gods whose passions burned fiercely and left behind storms of consequence, Hermes loved in gentler ways, weaving connection with the same care he used to guide travelers. His romances were never loud, they were quiet, contemplative, and often filled with meaning far deeper than desire alone. And in those stories, we find the origins of children who carried his nature forward, children born not only of his body but of the qualities that defined him. His most famous divine union was with Aphrodite, the goddess of love herself, whose beauty softened every breeze and warmed every shadow. Where others approached her with overwhelming adoration or trembling awe, Hermes approached her with curiosity. He admired beauty as one admires a poem, not as something to possess, but as something to understand. Aphrodite, in turn, found in Hermes a companion who did not idolize her, but saw her as a soul, not a symbol. In their union there was harmony, her gentleness complementing his cleverness, her stillness balancing his movement. From this meeting came Hermaphroditos. The child was not merely a blending of two bodies, but of two philosophies, beauty and balance, woven into one being. According to the file, the birth of Hermaphroditos held a deeply philosophical meaning, representing unity of dualities, the merging of masculine and feminine, the dissolving of divisions that human minds cling to. Hermes understood this immediately. Where others saw paradox, he saw truth. Hermaphroditos carried within them the symbolic expression of Hermes' own nature, neither one thing nor the other, but both, harmoniously, simultaneously. In the child's serene face, Hermes saw the cosmological lesson he had always lived. The world is not divided by opposites, but shaped by their dance. He watched Hermaphroditos grow with quiet pride, guiding them in the art of moving between states with grace, just as he moved between worlds. And Aphrodite, in her luminous way, blessed the child with the gift of love unbound by category or form. Together, they created a life that embodied unity, fluidity, and the deeper truth that identity is a spectrum, not a wall. But Hermes was not bound only to the divine. Among mortals, he moved with the same soft curiosity, and sometimes his path crossed with women whose spirits intrigued him. Chione was one of these. She was a mortal of rare beauty, so striking that even Apollo and Hermes were drawn to her radiance. But unlike Apollo's fiery admiration, Hermes approached her quietly, with the calm assurance of someone who understood the fragility of mortal hearts. He came to her at night, slipping into her room like moonlight through an open window, gentle and weightless. What passed between them was not forceful divine passion, but something softer, more intimate, a meeting of curiosity and tenderness. From their union came Autolycus, and though the world remembers Autolycus as a thief, that title misses the heart of who he was. Autolycus inherited Hermes' cunning, but not his malice. He possessed an uncanny ability to see possibilities where others saw obstacles, to slip past danger with grace, to negotiate uncertainty with wit sharpened like a polished blade. He could bend the truth, reshape perception, turn misfortune into advantage, all gifts inherited from his divine father. Hermes watched over him from afar, amused and proud of the ways his son navigated the mortal world with such fearless creativity. Autolycus would later pass these qualities down through his own lineage, and eventually they reached another figure whose name echoed across Greek myth, Odysseus. This made Hermes not only a guide to the hero, but an ancestor in spirit and blood. Every clever escape Odysseus executed, every plan he devised, every deception that protected his men all carried the faint echo of Hermes' lineage. It was as though the trickster god walked beside Odysseus, not only as a mentor, but as a whisper from within the hero's very bloodline. Hermes' romantic connections were not marked by conquest or tragedy. They were marked by growth, his own, and that of the families he helped create. Where Zeus left storms, Hermes left lessons. Where Ares left wounds, Hermes left wisdom. Where Poseidon shook the earth, Hermes softened the road. For even in love, Hermes embodied transition. He was not a god who settled into relationships with permanence. He was a god who entered lives briefly, gently, leaving behind children who carried his gifts into the world. Children of unity, children of curiosity, children of cunning, children whose existence softened boundaries or shifted human understanding in subtle but powerful ways. Looking at the threads of his lineage from Hermaphrodito's philosophical beauty, to Chione's brief but tender encounter, to Autolycus' mastery of cleverness, it becomes clear that Hermes' legacy is not measured in blood, but in qualities. Qualities that ripple through myths like currents beneath the surface, qualities that shape heroes, transform worlds, and turn ordinary moments into paths of destiny. Hermes loved quietly, but the echoes of those loves traveled far, and through his children, the god of movement ensured that his cleverness, compassion, curiosity, and balance would wander across ages, just as he wandered across the earth. It is one of the quiet wonders of Greek myth that the same two gods who once faced each other in suspicion, a furious Apollo and a newborn Hermes, pretending to sleep, would one day stand side by side as companions whose talents shaped the very rhythm of Olympus. Their friendship began, strangely enough, with music. After the confrontation over the stolen cattle, Apollo took Hermes' lyre not as a consolation but as a revelation. Sensing the depth of artistry woven into its shell and strings, he played it with the precision of a master. Yet each note felt new, as though Hermes had placed a piece of his own cleverness into the instrument. Hermes listened, delighted, and soon brought forth his own pipes, crafted from reeds that whispered like soft wind through marsh grass. Apollo played with exact timing, each tone deliberate, measured, luminous. Hermes played with fluid improvisation, bending melodies like willow branches, drifting effortlessly from rhythm to rhythm. Their first musical contest drew the muses, who gathered not to judge but to marvel at the harmony of contrast unfolding before them. Apollo's music was clarity structured, celestial, radiant like sunlight cutting across still water. Hermes' music was motion wandering, curious, playful like wind shifting through fields. Together, their sounds intertwined, lifting the air in a dance of intellect and imagination. No winner was declared, for even the muses sensed that neither art existed to defeat the other. They existed to complete one another. Over time, the two gods negotiated an unspoken division of artistic realms. Apollo claimed mastery over formal music, poetry, prophecy, and pure reason. Hermes embraced improvisation, cunning narratives, trickster tales, and the gentle bending of rules to reveal deeper truths. One shaped order, the other shaped possibility. One carved paths of light, the other carved shortcuts through shadow. And between them flowed a balance that enriched Olympus. Their friendship grew in these spaces between difference. Hermes often visited Apollo's temple at Delphi, drifting in like a breeze as Apollo spoke oracles to mortals seeking certainty. Apollo rarely laughed, yet, when Hermes arrived with a sly comment or a mischievous melody, a small smile would sometimes touch the sun god's lips. In return, Apollo gifted Hermes refinement, teaching him the subtler tones of restraint, the beauty of precision, the serenity of deliberate thought. Hermes taught Apollo adaptability, how to bend rather than break, how to see beyond rigid truths, how to move through ambiguity without losing oneself. If Apollo was the mind of Olympus, Hermes was its breath. If Apollo was clarity, Hermes was freedom, and neither could fully shine without the other. In this friendship born from theft, the gods discovered something rare, a harmony deeper than music, a kinship built not from similarity, but from the way two different spirits can fit together like two hands joined in the dark. Among all the relationships Hermes carried across his long life, none was more complicated, more quietly bitter, than the one he shared with Hera. Not hatred, not open war, but an unspoken hostility woven through years of political tension and unhealed wounds. Hermes, at his core, was born in secrecy. He was the son of Zeus and Maia, conceived in the shadows, hidden in a cave, protected from Hera's gaze with deception and silence. His very first breath in the world was tied not to celebration, but to fear of Hera's wrath. He was, in Hera's eyes, a living reminder of betrayal, a symbol of Zeus' faithlessness, embodied in a child who had done nothing but exist. Hera never forgot this, and though she did not strike at Hermes the way she struck at other illegitimate children, her anger became something colder, systemic, political, rooted not in personal spite but in the preservation of order as she understood it. Hermes felt this distance every time he entered the halls of Olympus. Hera would watch him with a gaze that was not cruel but calculating, as if she were measuring how much trouble he might become. She knew he was clever, too clever, perhaps, for a child born outside the laws of divine marriage. And so she remained wary, always wary. In missions involving Zeus' other hidden offspring, Hera's interference was subtle but relentless. Whenever Hermes was sent to protect a child born of one of Zeus' affairs, Hera's shadow was already there, closing doors, spreading fear, bending circumstances against the innocent. Hermes felt it particularly when rescuing Dionysus. Every safe house he prepared, every gentle sanctuary he created, was eventually threatened by Hera's influence, forcing him to flee again and again with the frightened child in his arms. There were no confrontations, no thunderous accusations, only the silent pressure of a queen defending what she believed was the rightful order of Olympus. Hermes understood, and that understanding hurt more than anger ever could, for he saw, with clear eyes, that Hera's wrath was not blind cruelty. It was the heartbreak of a goddess trying to maintain dignity in a world where her husband's betrayals kept wounding her. He was not the cause, but he was a consequence. This political coldness grew with time. When Hermes intervened to help Heracles, or Perseus, or any other child of Zeus' secret passions, Hera attempted to obstruct him not with open violence, but with divine bureaucracy, shifting alliances, whispered prohibitions, and quiet pressure meant to slow his work. Hermes would move through these obstacles with graceful diplomacy, never confronting Hera directly, never provoking her further, for he knew that her anger was not truly his to resolve. It belonged to Zeus. He walked between them, the messenger of a fractured marriage, the bridge spanning a chasm that could never be closed. Yet beneath the political tension, there was an unspoken sadness. Hermes, born clever and sensitive, saw more than others realized. He sensed the loneliness behind Hera's fury, the vulnerability beneath her unshakable mask of regal poise. He never hated her. Even when her actions threatened those he was sworn to protect, he saw the wounded queen behind the goddess of wrath. And Hera, for all her suspicion, never struck directly at Hermes. Perhaps she saw in him something of Maia's quiet innocence. Perhaps she recognized that Hermes never sought to undermine her. Or perhaps, even in her anger, she understood that he too was a victim of Zeus' infidelity, an unintended casualty in a war neither of them chose. Thus their relationship remained locked in a delicate balance, two divine figures bound by politics, wounded by the same source of betrayal, but unable to bridge the gulf between them. No forgiveness, no reconciliation. Only a quiet, endless hostility, a tension that drifted like a shadow across the marble halls of Olympus, subtle as breath, lasting as fate. Long after the myths were first sung, long after the gods carved their stories across mountains and seas, Hermes continued to live in the daily rhythms of the Greek people. He was not a distant deity locked in marble temples. He was woven into the small rituals of life, the steps before a journey, the bargaining over goods, the whisper of a decision made at a crossroads. Nowhere was this connection more visible than in the festival of Hermes, celebrated every year with the energy of youth and the joy of movement. During Hermes, boys and young men gathered in the gymnasia, their bodies dusted with oil and sand, prepared for contests of speed, agility, and strength. These games were not about war or dominance. They honored Hermes as the god of athletic grace, clever competition, and the playful spirit that made exertion feel like poetry. Races were run with feet barely touching the ground, as if the winged sandals of the god brushed against them. Wrestlers grappled not with brutality but with technique, each movement echoing Hermes' balance between strength and gentleness. Some cities held torch relays, where runners carried flames through winding streets, symbolizing the god's tireless movement across the world. The passing of the torch was more than ceremony, it was a prayer that Hermes would carry messages of health, fortune, and clarity to every household the flame passed. In many towns, the Hermes festival also included games of wit and wordplay. Children recited riddles, poets improvised verses, and merchants engaged in friendly haggling competitions that celebrated negotiation as an art rather than a necessity. This reflected an important truth about Hermes. He was not simply the god of speed or travel, he was the god of cleverness, diplomacy, and opportunity. The Hermes honored all these traits, blending athletic skill with mental agility in a festival that felt alive with the god's presence. Throughout Greece, different regions held Hermes especially close. Arcadia, the place of his birth, treated him almost as a local guardian. Small shrines dotted the mountain paths, each marked with offerings of bread, fruit, or little bronze figurines left by shepherds who believed Hermes watched over their flock. In quiet caves echoing with dripping water, Arcadian villagers lit small lamps, letting the smoke curl upward like prayers carried by the god's swift feet. For them, Hermes was not a remote Olympian, he was a familiar presence born among their hills and forests. Athens, too, kept Hermes near to daily life. In the bustling agora, Hermes' stone pillars bearing the god's watchful head stood at the corners of markets and avenues. Merchants would touch these pillars before opening their stalls, asking for luck, honesty, and the quick tongue required to make a fair trade. Travelers departing the city placed small coins at the foot of the Hermes, hoping the god would smooth the road ahead or warn them subtly when danger approached. These pillars were so essential that harming one was considered a serious crime, an offense not just against religion but against the stability of civic life itself. But perhaps Hermes' presence was felt most deeply at the crossroads, simple, dusty intersections where paths met beneath open sky. Here, shrines to Hermes stood like quiet guardians, carved from wood or stone, decorated with simple garlands or small clay cups filled with oil. Whenever someone reached such a crossroads, whether a farmer returning from the fields or a traveler contemplating a journey, they paused, they breathed, they touched the shrine, because crossroads were sacred. They were places of possibility, choice, transition, and Hermes, the god who walked between worlds, understood these moments better than any other deity. The Greeks believed Hermes could see further than mortals. At these intersections could sense which roads led to safety, which to danger, which to change. And so they asked for his guidance, not with elaborate rituals, but with quiet sincerity. A coin placed on the ground, a whispered hope, a hand resting on cool stone. Whether in Arcadia's mountains, in Athens' marketplaces, or on the lonely roads connecting one city to another, Hermes was present in the smallest gestures. He lived in torchlight, passed from runner to runner, in the swift step of an athlete, in the laughter of young poets improvising clever lines, in the choices made at dawn, when travelers tightened their sandals and stepped into uncertainty. Hermes was the god closest to movement, movement of feet, movement of thought, movement of fate, and in this way, he remained forever woven into the living world of Greece. There comes a moment in the life of every great god when myth crosses borders, when stories once spoken under Greek skies drift, like migrating birds, into distant lands where new meanings take root. For Hermes, this moment came when his name touched Egypt, and there, in the quiet halls of ancient temples and libraries, he met another god, Thoth, the Egyptian scribe of truth, knowledge, and the measured rhythm of the cosmos. Thoth was wisdom written in moonlight, the keeper of hieroglyphs, the recorder of divine laws. Hermes was wisdom carried on wind, the messenger who moved through worlds with a mind quicker than lightning. And so, when the Greeks encountered Thoth, they saw in him a reflection of their own swift-footed god, different in form, but resonant in spirit. Two mirrors facing each other, two intelligences recognizing themselves across cultures. From this recognition emerged a new being, Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes, the thrice great. Not a fusion of bodies, but a fusion of ideas. A deity shaped not by a single myth, but by the union of Greek curiosity and Egyptian cosmic order. The teachings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus were not shouts of revelation, but whispers, quiet phrases carved into scrolls and tablets that scholars guarded with reverence. One phrase echoed across centuries, slipping into the heart of Western mysticism. As above, so below. 7 words, soft as falling sand, yet dense with meaning. They spoke of a universe woven from correspondences, where the movements of stars reflected the movements of the soul, where the smallest gestures mirrored the architecture of the divine. In this single sentence, Hermes' love of boundaries and Thoth's mastery of cosmic balance met perfectly. It was the ultimate expression of a truth both gods embodied. The world is one, its layers echo each other, and understanding one layer opens the doors to all the rest. The figure of Hermes Trismegistus became a bridge between realms, between philosophy and magic, science and spirit, mortal thought and divine mystery. His teachings shaped the birth of alchemy, where metals and souls transformed together in a symbolic dance of purification. He influenced astrology, guiding thinkers to see the heavens not as distant lights, but as a language written across the night. He inspired Hermetic philosophy, a body of wisdom that whispered that the universe was not chaos but correspondence, not accident but architecture. And in time, his ideas flowed into mystical traditions across Europe, into Gnostic texts, Renaissance magic, medieval scholarship, and the quiet devotion of seekers who believed that truth was not found in force but in contemplation. Through Hermes Trismegistus, the Greek god of boundaries became something more, a guardian of inner thresholds, a guide not only for travelers on roads, but for travelers of the spirit, those who sought to cross the invisible borders within the self. In Egyptian temples, he presided over learning. In Greek philosophical schools, he was the muse of intellectual discovery. In the hidden chambers of alchemists, he was the whisper behind the turning of metals and the refining of souls. Hermes, who once carried messages between gods, now carried messages between eras, cultures, and dimensions of thought. His form softened into abstraction. He became the symbol of ultimate wisdom, wisdom that was not loud, but quiet, hidden, patient, wisdom that asked not for belief, but for exploration, wisdom that said, "Look within, and you will find the universe looking back." And so Hermes' story flowed far beyond Olympus and Arcadia, far beyond the dusty crossroads of Greece. It entered the scrolls of scholars, the dreams of mystics, the symbols of alchemists bent over their crucibles. Hermes Trismegistus became less a god and more a guiding principle, an eternal whisper of unity between all things, above and below, visible and hidden, mortal and divine. When Greek stories drifted westward into the lands of the Roman Republic, Many gods changed their names, their forms, and even their purposes. Hermes, so fluid and adaptable in Greek imagination, underwent one of the most natural transformations of all. He became Mercury, a god streamlined for a vast empire, reshaped for roads that stretched for thousands of miles and armies that marched with disciplined precision. Yet beneath this new armor of practicality, the old spirit of Hermes still glowed, light-footed and clever as ever. In the Roman world, Mercury was not only a messenger of the gods, he was a symbol of the entire machinery that made the empire run. Where Hermes had danced between mountains and myths, Mercury walked straight down the stone roads of an empire that valued efficiency above all. Roman merchants prayed to him before crossing the Mediterranean, asking for fair winds, safe harbors, and honest deals in foreign ports. Markets placed his statues near their entrances, slender, winged figures holding purses, and caduceus reminding vendors and buyers alike that prosperity flowed best when guided by intelligence and good faith. Because the Romans saw commerce not just as exchange, but as the pulse of the empire, Mercury became a patron of practical economics, blessing contracts, ensuring profit, and smoothing negotiation. But his influence extended far beyond the marketplace. In the Roman army, Mercury was invoked as a guide of movement, the protector of scouts and messengers who threaded through forests and battlefields with reports that could shift the outcome of entire campaigns. Officers prayed to him for clarity, for the swiftness of decision, for the ability to outmaneuver enemies with strategy rather than brute force. In this way, Mercury's cunning, once playful, became tactical, a quiet mind working behind the disciplined march of Roman legions. He was also the silent guardian of the empire's legendary road network. These roads, stretching across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East, were arteries of trade and communication, and Mercury's presence was felt at every milestone. Travelers left small offerings at rural shrines, coins, oil, laurel leaves, asking the god of speed and safe passage to watch over their journeys. To the Romans, movement itself was sacred, for without movement an empire could not breathe, and Mercury was the god who kept that breath steady. Yet even as Mercury adapted to Roman priorities, the essence of Hermes remained. The Romans still honored his wit, his improvisational nature, his gift for navigating the boundaries between domains. He was a god who evolved effortlessly, shifting shape while keeping his core. Hermes had once guided souls, travelers, merchants, and heroes. Mercury now guided soldiers, road builders, traders, bureaucrats, and ships sailing under imperial banners. The roles changed, the world changed, but the idea at the heart of him, a god of movement, intelligence, and connection, endured. In becoming Mercury, Hermes proved once again what he had always embodied: the power to adapt without losing oneself, to transform without breaking, to travel between cultures as easily as between worlds. A god forever in motion, yet always entirely himself. Even in an age of satellites, fiber optic cables, and instant messages, the spirit of Hermes continues to move quietly beneath the surface of modern life. He is no longer seen standing at crossroads of dusty Greek roads, but his presence lingers in every moment, shaped by communication, negotiation, travel, or exchange. He has become a symbol of connection not just between places, but between people, cultures, and ideas. In a world where information moves faster than wind, Hermes becomes the patron of every crossed boundary, every transmitted signal, every whisper of understanding shared between distant hearts. Diplomats still invoke him metaphorically as the guide of difficult conversations, the patron of calm minds in heated rooms, the quiet voice that helps bridges form where walls once stood. Commerce, too, echoes his name more than ever. Global markets, international trade routes, shipping networks, and digital transactions all carry the imprint of a god who once guided merchants through Mediterranean storms. Hermes has simply traded the open sea for the global internet, the scroll for the screen, the marketplace for the digital agora. He lives in every message delivered, every contract negotiated, every journey taken across borders where safety depends on clarity and trust. In modern imagination and popular culture, Hermes appears in countless forms. He shows up in novels as the witty guide, the clever traveler, the master of disguise. He slips through movies and series as the fast-moving messenger, the comedic spark, the strategist who sees what others miss. Graphic novels and video games portray him with winged sandals and a silver tongue, moving between realms with a mixture of charm and mischief that feels timeless. Even brands borrow his symbolism: courier companies, athletic wear, communication technologies, all echoing his ancient association with speed, movement, and connection. And in psychology, philosophy, and literary studies, Hermes has become the archetype of the trickster mediator, a symbol of transition, ambiguity, and intellectual agility. He represents the power of adaptability, the value of thinking sideways, the beauty of solving problems through cleverness rather than force. Yet beyond symbols and entertainment, Hermes survives in the quieter places where myth and daily life overlap. In the pause before a difficult conversation, in the courage required to cross into unknown territory, in the moment someone finds the right words to heal a misunderstanding, in the feeling of being guided, somehow, through uncertainty. Modern travelers still carry charms with wing motifs. Writers still place him at the edges of stories, and across cultures, the idea of a psychopomp, a gentle guide for souls and transitions, continues to resonate deeply. Hermes reminds the modern world that movement is sacred, that communication is a form of magic, that cleverness can be kindness, and that every message, every journey, every connection, however small, participates in something ancient and enduring. The myths evolve, the images change, but the whisper of Hermes remains, a reminder that we are all travelers, carrying stories across the shifting landscapes of time. P20. And now, after wandering through centuries of stories, crossing worlds and ages, we return softly to where everything began, back to the mountains of Arcadia, back to the quiet forests that breathe in their sleep, back to the cave where Maya once held her newborn son in trembling arms, hidden from Hermes' gaze, hidden from the storms of Olympus. The air here is cool again, and still, and touched with the gentle scent of moss and night-blooming herbs. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the faint drip of water echoing through the stone walls, the same echoes that welcomed Hermes into the world. Breathe in slowly, and let the memory of this place settle around you like a soft blanket. In this cave, nothing rushes, nothing demands. The world moves at the pace of a heartbeat, a single breath, a whisper. Hermes has traveled far since that first dawn. He has walked through kingdoms of men, through palaces of gods, through the quiet halls of the dead and the shining streets of Olympus. He has guided heroes, guarded travelers, comforted souls, and carried messages between worlds. He has stood at crossroads where mortals hesitated and placed his hand gently on their shoulder. He has watched ships sail, watched cities rise, watched entire civilizations whisper his name in prayers of movement and connection. He has been a thief, a teacher, a friend, a mediator, and a guide. He has been both shadow and light, both laughter and stillness, a god of thresholds, a god of beginnings, a god of endings. And yet, for all his wandering, for all his shifting shapes and shifting roles, the place he began remains unchanged. The cave still glows with a faint, warm gold, the same soft color that wrapped around him the moment he opened his eyes. The stone walls still carry the memory of that first lullaby of silence. The air still hums with the ancient breath of the mountain. And tonight, as you drift deeper into your own quiet, Hermes returns here too, not as a newborn, not as a trickster, not as a god of swift feet and silvered tongue, but simply as a quiet presence standing at the edge of the cave's light. He stands where the glow blends into shadow, where day slips gently into night. He stands where beginnings and endings touch. Outside, the Arcadian forest is dark, but not cold. Leaves shift in the breeze like soft fingers brushing stone. Stars gather above the mountains, their light gentle, their silence deep. Somewhere along a distant path, a night bird sings a single note, then lets the world fall quiet again. These are the sounds Hermes has always loved, the sounds that do not claim attention, but arrive unannounced, simple and true. He steps inside the cave now, as lightly as he once stepped out of it. You can almost imagine his sandals brushing against the stone floor, his movements calm and deliberate. He is not rushing anywhere tonight. There are no messages to carry, no souls to guide, no cleverness needed, no diplomacy, no stories to shape. Tonight, Hermes is simply returning home. The cave welcomes him as though no time has passed. The faint golden glow flickers in recognition, as if greeting an old friend. Hermes kneels beside the place where his basket once lay, its woolen lining long since gone, but the memory of warmth still lingering in the earth. He runs a hand gently along the smooth stone, feeling the imprint of his own first breath echoing somewhere just beneath the surface. He closes his eyes, not to sleep, but to remember. And the mountain remembers with him. It remembers the moment he lifted his head for the first time, the moment he stepped out of the basket, the moment he walked toward the light. It remembers the music of his lyre drifting through its tunnels. It remembers the laughter of a child discovering mischief, discovering movement, discovering the world. It remembers everything. Hermes breathes out slowly, and the cave breathes with him. The rhythm of it is steady, soft, grounding, a rhythm you can follow now, letting your own breath mirror the quiet ease of the god who walks between worlds, in, out, in, out. Each breath draws you deeper into stillness, deeper into the quiet golden glow of Arcadia. Each breath softens the edges of the day. Each breath carries you further from worry and closer to rest. Hermes opens his eyes again, and though you cannot see him, you can feel the warmth of his presence. He stands once more, adjusts the brim of his petassos, and moves toward the cave entrance. The night outside is calm and limitless, but before he leaves, he turns slightly, as if acknowledging you, as if recognizing your presence here in this shared moment of quiet. There is no trick in his smile now, only gentleness, only peace. He steps out into the Arcadian night, his silhouette blending with the darkness, his footsteps fading like a whisper carried by mountain wind, and yet the glow within the cave remains, a small, steady light, a reminder that beginnings never fully disappear, that even gods return home in the soft hours of the night, that we, too, can return to the places within ourselves where peace first found us. So rest now. Let Arcadia hold you. Let the quiet cradle you. Let the golden light soften your thoughts until they drift like mist across a still forest. Hermes has walked far and wide, through stories and ages, but his beginning remains here in gentle shadow, in warm stone, in silence wrapped like a blanket around the world. And tonight, as sleep gathers around you, that light is yours too, a whisper in the dark, a reminder that you may wander anywhere, but you can always return home. Rest now. Let the cave grow dim, let the world grow soft, and fall gently into sleep.